I am Joshua, 35, and my own family uninvited me from my brother's wedding but still demanded I pay the $65,000 bill. Before I tell you about how I completely dismantled their fake high society lives and canceled their entire dream wedding with a single phone call, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my corner office, reviewing the quarterly financial reports for my hospitality group, watching the Seattle rain streak across the floor-to-ceiling windows. My desk was piled with expansion plans, but the room was perfectly quiet. Then the intercom buzzed. My executive assistant, Julian, told me there was a wedding planner on line 2 who insisted on speaking with me regarding my younger brother Elijah's upcoming wedding. I picked up the phone, fully expecting to hear about some last-minute detail. Maybe they wanted to upgrade the floral arrangements again, or maybe my mother had decided that the imported champagne wasn't quite expensive enough to impress her future in-laws. The wedding was exactly 10 days away, and for the past 6 months, I had been the family's personal ATM. "Hello, Mr. Reed," the voice on the other end said. "This is Elena Martinez from Prestige Wedding Planning. I am calling regarding the Reed-Williams wedding on the 23rd. "Yes, Elena," I replied, leaning back in my leather chair. "What can I help you with today? Is there an issue with the vendor timeline?" There was a long, uncomfortable pause on the other end. I could hear the faint sound of her shuffling papers. "Well, sir, this is rather awkward, but I have been instructed by the groom and his parents to inform you that your invitation to the ceremony and the reception has been rescinded." I stopped spinning my pen. My hand froze hovering over a financial spreadsheet. I stared out the window for a solid 5 seconds before responding. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" Her voice trembled slightly, clearly hating the position she was put in. "Your family has decided that your presence at the wedding would be disruptive. They feel it would be best for everyone involved if you did not attend." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach, not out of heartbreak, but out of a deep, familiar sense of betrayal. It was the same feeling I had swallowed 100 times growing up, but this time it was magnified by the sheer audacity of the situation. "I see," I said slowly, keeping my voice dangerously level. "And what about the financial arrangements?" "That is the other reason I am calling," Elena said, her voice dropping to an apologetic whisper. "However, the family is hoping you will still honor your commitment to cover the venue deposit and the catering costs as previously discussed. They instructed me to remind you that the final $65,000 payment is due by end of business tomorrow." I actually laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a sharp, bitter exhale that echoed in my massive office. My family wanted my money, but not my presence. They wanted me to fund the most extravagant celebration of their lives while being entirely excluded from it. They genuinely thought I was going to pay for the privilege of being humiliated. "Elena," I said, my voice dropping an octave, completely stripping away the polite, wedding guest persona I had been wearing. "I need you to listen very carefully to what I am about to tell you." "Of course, sir," she stammered. "Cancel the entire wedding." The silence on the line was thick. I could almost hear her heart drop. I'm sorry. What did you just say?" "Cancel everything," I commanded, my tone leaving absolutely no room for misinterpretation. "The venue, the catering, the floral arrangements, the live music, the hotel blocks for the out-of-town guests. All of it. Terminate the contracts." "Sir, please," Elena pleaded, her professional composure cracking. "I think there has been a massive misunderstanding. I know you are upset, but you are not the groom. You are just a financial contributor. You cannot just call up and cancel someone else's wedding." I stood up from my desk and walked toward the window, looking down at the bustling city streets below. "Actually, Elena, I can," I said quietly, "because I own Cascade Manor, the venue where the reception is being held. I own Pinnacle Catering, the company providing the 5-course dinner. I own the Prestige hotel chain where all 40 rooms are booked for their guests. And as of my corporate buyout 6 months ago, I own Prestige Wedding Planning. I am your boss." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the kind of absolute, terrified quiet that happens right before an avalanche breaks. "Oh my God!" she finally gasped, the realization hitting her like a freight train. "You have 24 hours to notify all vendors, the guests, and the venues that the Reed Williams wedding has been canceled," I told her. "Anyone who has already made travel arrangements will receive full compensation for their flights and expenses from my corporate accounts. But there will be no wedding on the 23rd. I hung up the phone and placed it gently on my desk. I didn't throw it. I didn't scream. I just stood there, staring out at the Seattle skyline. In the distance, just a few blocks away, I could see the sleek glass architecture of my flagship hotel. I knew for a fact that my parents and my brother's future in-laws were probably sitting in the lobby right now, drinking my complimentary artisanal coffee, completely unaware that their weekend of high society luxury was about to evaporate into thin air. My jaw was clenched so tight my teeth ached. For 15 years, I had built my life from the ground up. I started with nothing but a high school diploma and a relentless work ethic, scrubbing floors and managing inventory until my hands bled. I built an empire that handled everything from corporate galas and extravagant weddings to the occasional high-end funeral reception and bitter divorce settlement party. My businesses were a well-oiled machine. But to my family, I was still just the high school dropout. I was the embarrassment, the struggling older brother who couldn't hold down a real corporate job. They had absolutely no idea that my personal net worth was north of $230 million. They had no idea that my lawyer, Dylan, managed more assets for me in a single day than my entire family would earn in 3 lifetimes. I walked over to my private wet bar and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were perfectly steady. The anger I felt wasn't a fiery, explosive rage. It was cold. It was calculating. This wasn't just a sudden, rash decision made out of petty spite. This cancellation was the culmination of a decade and a half of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. To understand why I was willing to drop a nuclear bomb on my own brother's wedding, you need to understand the foundation of lies and condescension my family had built our relationship on. You need to know exactly how we got to this point, to a place where a mother and a father could look their eldest son in the eye, take his hard-earned money, and then shut the door in his face. Let me take you back to where this toxic dynamic really started. Let me tell you about the years of silent sacrifice, the brutal judgment, and the moment I realized that blood doesn't make you family, it just makes you related. Growing up in our middle-class suburban home, success had a very specific, inflexible definition. My father, Matthew, was a mid-level insurance adjuster. My mother, Sarah, was an administrative assistant. They were obsessed with appearances, safety, and the corporate ladder. In their minds, you went to college, you got a degree, you secured a salary with a matching 401k, and you bought a house with a 2-car garage. Anything else was considered a catastrophic failure. I was 17 when the battle lines were drawn. It was a cold November evening, right around Thanksgiving. We were all sitting at the dining room table, picking at the roast chicken my mother had made. I was working 40 hours a week as an assistant manager at a local Irish pub, making incredibly good money for a teenager. I was learning supply chain logistics, staff management, and profit margins. "I've made a decision," I announced, setting my fork down. "I'm not going to college next year. I'm going to work full-time at the restaurant. I want to own my own place someday. Maybe a whole chain." The temperature in the room plummeted. My mother looked at me as if I had just announced I was joining a cult. She dropped her napkin onto her plate. "Joshua, restaurant work is not a career. It's a stepping stone. It's something you do to pay for textbooks." "It is a career if you own it," I argued, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm learning more about running a business right now than I would sitting in a lecture hall for 4 years. My brother, Elijah, who was only 15 at the time but already being groomed as the family's golden child, let out a condescending snort. He was a straight-A student, entirely focused on getting into a top-tier business school. "You can't build wealth flipping burgers and pouring beers, Josh. The failure rate is enormous. You need a real education to get a real salary." My father pointed a finger at me from across the table. "Look at your brother. He's already planning his college applications. We've been putting money into his college fund for years because he has a future. I am not going to sit here and watch you throw your life away on a pipe dream. You will never be respected in this world without a degree. And you're going to embarrass the family? My younger sister Caroline chimed in, perfectly echoing my parents' snobbery. What are we supposed to tell people when they ask what you do? That you clean up vomit at a dive bar? I looked at their faces. There was no support. There was no curiosity about my passion. There was only deep, suffocating judgment. That night, I realized I was on my own. I graduated high school with a 2.8 GPA, packed my bags, and moved into a cheap studio apartment. Over the next 5 years, I worked like a machine. I didn't just work at the pub. I consumed it. I learned every single aspect of the hospitality industry. I worked 100-hour weeks, missing holidays, birthdays, and family gatherings. When I did show up, I was usually exhausted, wearing cheap clothes and driving a beat-up Toyota Camry. My old boss, Mr. Carter, an aging man who wanted to retire and spend time with his grandkids, saw the fire in me. When I was 22, he offered to sell me the restaurant on a seller finance deal. I took out every loan I could, lived on ramen noodles, and bought the place. Within a year, I had doubled the profit margins. By 24, I owned 2 more locations. I sold all 3 for $2.8 million and immediately reinvested the capital into a high-end catering business. I was quietly becoming a millionaire, but my family's narrative never changed. Whenever I saw them, they treated me with a mix of pity and disdain. Elijah, meanwhile, had followed the blueprint perfectly. He got his business degree, landed an entry-level job at a Fortune 500 company, and secured his predictable salary. At family dinners, my parents would gush over Elijah's latest middle management promotion or his new leased BMW. "Joshua, when are you going to settle down?" my mother would ask, sighing loudly as she looked at my scuffed shoes. "Elijah just got another promotion. He has excellent health benefits. You're 27, you're still bouncing around between these food service gigs. It's time to get serious." I never corrected them. I never told them that my food service gig was clearing $400,000 in pure profit annually. I never mentioned that I had just sold the catering company for $12 million and was acquiring luxury real estate. I kept my mouth shut. Part of it was privacy, but a larger part was self-protection. I knew that if they found out I was wealthy, their judgment would suddenly turn into expectation. So, I let them believe I was struggling. I let them feel superior. It was the only way I could have peace. The real nightmare began when Elijah announced his engagement to Isabella. Isabella was exactly the kind of woman my parents had prayed Elijah would marry. She came from old money. Her father, David, was a wealthy corporate attorney who lived in a gated community, drove a Bentley, and belonged to an exclusive country club. Isabella was polished, condescending, and expected the absolute best of everything. When they brought Isabella to our house for the first time, the dynamic shifted immediately. My parents practically bent over backwards to impress her. My mother brought out the good china. My father talked loudly about his investments to sound more sophisticated than an insurance adjuster. Then came the wedding planning. Isabella didn't want a nice, standard wedding. She wanted a royal coronation. She wanted Cascade Manor, the most expensive, exclusive venue in the Pacific Northwest. She wanted a 5-course plated dinner, a live jazz band, imported flowers, and an open bar with top-shelf liquor. The budget quickly spiraled toward $100,000. My parents, desperate to keep up appearances and terrified of looking poor in front of Isabella's father, panicked. They didn't have that kind of money. Their savings were modest. But instead of telling Elijah and Isabella to scale back and live within their means, my parents made a catastrophic decision. I found out through Caroline, who accidentally let it slip during a phone call. My parents had secretly taken out a second mortgage on their house to fund the wedding. They were draining their retirement accounts. They were literally sacrificing their financial future just to maintain the illusion of wealth for one single day, all to appease a daughter-in-law who looked down her nose at them anyway. And when the money started running out, and the vendors demanded their final deposits, My family suddenly remembered they had an older son. It started with a phone call from my mother in early March. Her voice was uncharacteristically sweet, dripping with the kind of artificial warmth she usually reserved for speaking to bank tellers when she needed a favor. "Joshua, honey, how are you doing? How is work at the catering place?" she asked. "It's fine, Mom," I replied, staring at a multi-million-dollar acquisition contract on my desk. "What's going on?" she sighed, playing the victim perfectly. "It's Elijah's wedding. We are just so stressed, Joshua. The costs keep piling up. Isabella's family is paying for the honeymoon and the dress, but the venue and the food are falling on us. Your father and I are really struggling to make the final payments. We don't know what to do." She paused, waiting for me to take the bait. "How much are you short?" I asked. "Well, the venue deposit is $20,000, and the catering company requires $45,000 upfront. We were hoping that maybe you had some savings? If you could just help us with a small portion, maybe 10 or 15,000, we would pay you back eventually." I knew they would never pay me back, but a strange curiosity took over me. I wanted to test them. I wanted to see how they would treat me if I became the savior of their precious social event. "I've been saving a lot lately," I lied smoothly. "I live simply. I can cover the $65,000, Mom. I can pay for the venue and the catering." There was a sharp gasp on the other end of the line. "Joshua, oh my Lord, are you serious? $65,000? But how? Can you really afford that? We don't want you going into debt." "I can afford it," I said. "I'll wire the money to the wedding planner's escrow account by the end of the week." For the first time in my life, my mother actually sounded like she respected me. "Joshua, you are a lifesaver. You are saving your brother's dream. We are so incredibly grateful. You have no idea." For the next 6 months, I experienced a bizarre, alternate reality. Suddenly, I wasn't the family failure anymore. I was the generous benefactor. When I showed up to family dinners, I was offered the best seat. Elijah would clap me on the shoulder and ask my opinion on the groomsmen's suits. Isabella, who usually treated me like a mild inconvenience, would smile warmly and ask me which font I preferred for the invitations. Even my cousin Nathan, who constantly begged me for small loans he never repaid, started treating me like royalty. It was a perfectly orchestrated theatrical performance. They were putting up with my presence because my bank account was keeping their fantasy alive. What made it almost incredibly funny to me was the deep, poetic irony of the situation. They had no idea that they were hiring my companies. When Isabella bragged about securing Cascade Manor and how exclusive it was, I just nodded, knowing my management team had approved her booking. When my mother raved about the tasting menu at Pinnacle Catering, I smiled, knowing I had personally designed that menu 2 years ago. Every dollar I was giving them was essentially just being transferred from my personal account into my corporate accounts. But as the wedding drew closer, the cracks in their friendly facade began to show. The gratitude started morphing into something else. Anxiety. They had taken my money, but they couldn't shake their deeply ingrained belief that I was a lower-class embarrassment. The illusion shattered completely one Sunday evening, 3 weeks before the wedding. I had driven over to my parents' house to drop off a gift for my mother's birthday. I parked my old Camry a block away because the driveway was full, and I walked up to the back door. It was unlocked as usual. I stepped into the mudroom, about to announce myself, when I heard voices coming from the kitchen. It was my father, my mother, and Elijah. "We need to figure out what to do about Joshua," my father, Matthew, was saying, his voice tight with anxiety. "David's business partners are going to be there. Judges, politicians. We cannot have Joshua walking around in a cheap off-the-rack suit, trying to talk to these people about his restaurant shifts." I froze. My hand gripped the edge of the doorframe. "I know, Dad. I know," Elijah groaned. "Isabella is freaking out. She's terrified he's going to get drunk and try to give a speech. He thinks just because he chipped in some money, he's the guest of honor. He's going to ruin the aesthetic of the whole evening." "It was a mistake to take his money," my mother sighed. But we were desperate. Now he's going to expect to be in all the formal family portraits. He's going to stick out like a sore thumb. He just doesn't fit in with Isabella's crowd, Matthew. He's too rough around the edges. I'll handle it, Elijah said firmly. I'll start slowly cutting him out of the loop. We just need to keep him quiet and out of the way until the day is over. I stood there in the dark mudroom, my heart pounding in my chest. The pain wasn't a sharp stab. It was a slow, crushing weight. They weren't just embarrassed by me. They were actively conspiring to hide me. They took $65,000 of my money. Money they thought was my entire life savings. And their only concern was that my presence would taint their high-class aesthetic. I didn't confront them. I didn't yell. I quietly turned around, walked out the back door, and drove back to my penthouse in the city. The sad, hopeful brother who wanted his family's love died in that mudroom. The ruthless CEO took over. True to Elijah's word, the silent freeze-out began the very next day. First, the family group chat went completely dead. For weeks, it had been buzzing with updates about napkins and seating charts. Suddenly, nothing. I knew they had created a new chat without me. Then came the subtle exclusions. When I asked my mother what time I should arrive for the wedding rehearsal dinner, she gave a nervous little laugh. "Oh, Joshua, we actually had to downsize the rehearsal dinner. The restaurant had strict capacity limits. It's really just the bridal party now. You understand, don't you? You can just meet us at the ceremony on Saturday." I understood perfectly. I was paying for the food, but I wasn't allowed to eat it. But the real insult came a week before the wedding. Elijah called me, sounding strained. "Hey Josh, listen man, we have a massive problem with the venue capacity. The fire marshal is coming down hard on the numbers. We have to cut the guest list. And we're implementing a strict no+1 rule for unmarried guests." "A no+1 rule?" I asked smoothly. "Does that apply to everyone? Even cousin Nathan?" "Well, no. Nathan has been dating his girlfriend for 6 months. So it's serious," Elijah stammered, clearly lying through his teeth. "But since you're single, we just figured you wouldn't mind coming alone. We just don't have the space." I owned the venue. I knew the exact fire code capacity of the grand ballroom. It held 400 people. Their guest list was capped at 250. They were blatantly lying to my face just to ensure I didn't bring someone who might also embarrass them. "Sure, Elijah," I said. "Whatever you need." I spent the next few days preparing. I didn't just want to react. I wanted to ensure my response was legally and logistically flawless. I called Julian into my office. "I want a full audit of every single contract associated with the Reed Williams wedding this weekend. Venue, catering, hotel, planning. Everything." Within an hour, Julian placed a thick folder on my desk. Everything was ironclad. The contracts were signed by Elijah and my father, but the deposits and payments were routed from my accounts. Under the cancellation clauses of my own companies, the person who funded the account had the right to terminate the services, forfeiting the deposit. Since I was both the client and the owner, I held all the cards. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Luke, the general manager of my prestige hotel downtown. "Mr. Reed," Luke said, sounding exhausted. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know. The Reed wedding party started checking into their blocks today. The father of the groom, a Mr. Matthew Reed, has been screaming at the front desk staff for 20 minutes. He demanded a free upgrade to the presidential suite, claiming he is a VIP who practically bought the hotel. When we declined, he threatened to have my staff fired." A cold, dark smile spread across my face. "Thank you, Luke. Document everything. Be perfectly polite, but do not give them a single free upgrade. Let them enjoy their rooms. They won't be staying long." The stage was perfectly set. They were sitting in my hotel, eating my food, acting like royalty, while treating the staff like garbage. They had absolutely no idea that the sword hanging over their heads was held by the son they despised. It was the Thursday before the Saturday wedding. My mother called and asked me to come over to the house immediately. "It's an emergency family meeting," she said, her voice dripping with fake sorrow. When I walked into their living room, Matthew, Sarah, and Elijah were sitting on the couches, looking like they were at a funeral. They had rehearsed this. I could smell the cheap theatrics from a mile away. "Sit down, Joshua," my father said, gesturing to a single chair opposite them. Felt like an interrogation. "What's going on?" I asked, playing along. My mother dabbed her dry eyes with a tissue. "Joshua, we love you so much. You know that. But we've been talking, and, well, we think it would be best if you didn't come to the wedding on Saturday." I stared at her. Even though I knew it was coming, hearing the actual words out loud was staggering. "You're uninviting me from my brother's wedding?" Elijah leaned forward, trying to look sympathetic. "Josh, look at it from our perspective. This is a highly formal event. Isabella's family is very high society. You haven't exactly been around these types of functions. We're just worried you're going to feel incredibly uncomfortable and out of place. We want to spare you that anxiety." "You want to spare me anxiety?" I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. "Or you want to spare yourselves the embarrassment of having me there?" My father's face hardened. The fake sympathy vanished. "Don't put words in our mouths. The decision is final. You don't fit in, Joshua. You're going to stick out, and we cannot risk Isabella's father getting the wrong impression of our family. This is Elijah's big day. Stop making it about you." I let the silence stretch out, watching their faces. "So I am banned from the wedding. What about the $65,000 I paid for your venue and your food?" My father didn't even blink. "We still need that, obviously. The vendors are expecting the final payment clearing by tomorrow morning. You promised to help your family, Joshua. A real man doesn't go back on his word just because his feelings get hurt." It was breathtaking. The absolute, unadulterated sociopathy of it was breathtaking. They were kicking me out the back door while keeping both hands firmly buried in my wallet. "I see," I said softly. I stood up, smoothing the front of my jacket. "I understand perfectly. Have a great wedding, Elijah." I walked out of the house, got into my car, and drove away, which brings us back to the moment in my office. After the meeting at my parents' house, they had instructed their wedding planner, Elena, to call me and make sure the money was still coming, while officially revoking my invitation. They thought I was weak. They thought I would just cry in my cheap apartment and let them walk all over me. When I told Elena to cancel the wedding and revealed who I was, I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I felt liberation. "Process the cancellations immediately," I told Elena over the phone. "I want the venue locked down. I want the catering orders trashed. I want the hotel blocks revoked by 3 p.m. today. Send the automated cancellation emails to the groom and the bridal party." Within 45 minutes, the system executed my commands. At 2:15 p.m., my phone started vibrating on my desk. It was Elijah. I let it ring. At 2:18 p.m., it was my mother. I hit decline. At 2:20 p.m., Elijah called again. This time I answered. "Joshua, what the hell is going on?" Elijah screamed into the phone, his voice cracking with sheer, unfiltered panic. "I just got an email from Cascade Manor saying our contract is voided. The caterer just emailed saying the food is canceled. Even the hotel is saying our block is gone. Did you do this? Did you dispute the credit card charge?" "I didn't dispute any charges, Elijah," I said calmly, leaning back in my chair and looking at the Seattle skyline. "I simply decided not to fund a party I'm not invited to." "You can't do this," he shrieked. "You don't own the venue. You can't just cancel our contracts. Isabella is hyperventilating on the floor. Her dad is threatening to sue the venue." "Let him sue," I replied smoothly. "My legal team will happily handle David's paperwork." Elijah stopped screaming. Your legal team? What are you talking about? You're a restaurant shift manager. You don't have a legal team." "Elijah," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. "I haven't managed a shift in 10 years. I own Prestige Hospitality Group. I own Cascade Manor. I own the catering company. I own the hotel you are currently standing in. I own it all. You didn't just uninvite your brother from your wedding. You uninvited the owner of the entire ecosystem your wedding relies on. I could hear his ragged breathing on the other end of the line. His brain was desperately trying to process the information, trying to reject it, but the reality of the canceled contracts was staring him in the face. You're lying, he whispered, but he knew I wasn't. How do you think I had $65,000 in cash lying around, Elijah? Did you think I saved it up in a tip jar? I am worth $250 million. I was willing to give you the wedding of your dreams because I thought, maybe you were finally ready to treat me like a human being. But you and Mom and Dad couldn't help yourselves. You had to protect your fake, pretentious image. Josh, please, Elijah begged, his voice breaking into actual sobs. The golden child was finally shattered. Please, I'm sorry. We made a mistake. Please turn it back on. I'll put you at the head table. You can give a speech. Whatever you want. I don't want anything from you, I said coldly. Check out of my hotel by 4 p.m., or I'll have security remove you. I hung up the phone. This is the moment that changed everything, when I finally took back control of my life. Thank you for staying with me this far. You are amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below, so I know you've been on this journey with me. This not only helps more people find the story, but also lets me know my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is my biggest motivation to continue sharing the rest of this journey. The fallout was apocalyptic. Over the next 24 hours, my phone exploded with hundreds of calls and texts. My sister Caroline called, crying and screaming that I was destroying the family. My mother left 6 voicemails, alternating between violently cursing me out and sobbing uncontrollably, begging for mercy. I didn't respond to a single one. I called my lawyer, Dylan, just to ensure our bases were covered. Are we exposed on this? I asked him. Dylan chuckled. Not even slightly, Joshua. As the primary funder of the contracts under Prestige's terms of service, you have the unilateral right to cancel. Furthermore, you refunded the out-of-town guests for their flights and alternative hotel arrangements out of pocket. You've actually gone above and beyond. Isabella's father tried to threaten litigation, but once I sent him the ownership documentation and the contract clauses, his lawyers backed down immediately. The reality of the situation was finally sinking in for my family. The wedding was dead. There was no venue. There was no food. 250 high society guests were receiving cancellation emails 48 hours before the event. The humiliation they had been so terrified I would cause them had just been inflicted upon them by their own actions, on a scale they couldn't even comprehend. But my father, Matthew, wasn't ready to give up. He was a stubborn man who had spent his entire life believing he was the smartest guy in the room. He still thought he could intimidate me. On Friday morning, the day before the non-existent wedding, my intercom buzzed. Mr. Reed, Julian said, there is a man in the lobby demanding to see you. He says he is your father. Send him down to the underground VIP garage, I said. I'm heading out anyway. I took the private elevator down to the garage. My father was standing there, his face red with fury, his fists clenched. He looked ready to physically assault me. But then the elevator doors opened, and he froze. He didn't see the struggling son in a cheap suit. He saw me stepping out in a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit. And waiting for me, idling softly with the driver holding the door open, was my daily car. A sleek, midnight black Porsche Panamera. 2 security guards stood nearby, watching Matthew carefully. The anger drained out of my father's face, instantly replaced by shock, awe, and a sickening realization of his own insignificance. He looked at the suit, the guards, the Porsche, and finally at me. Joshua? He whispered, his voice trembling. Hello, Matthew, I said, not calling him Dad. He took a step forward, his hands shaking. Son. We didn't know. If you had just told us. If I had just told you I was rich, you would have treated me with respect? I interrupted, my voice echoing in the concrete garage. Is that what you're saying? That my worth as your son was entirely dependent on my bank account? He swallowed hard, unable to look me in the eye. We can fix this. We can talk. Your family. We can move past this misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, I said, walking toward the open door of the Porsche. You showed me exactly who you are. You mortgaged your house to impress strangers, and you threw away your own son because he didn't fit your aesthetic. You have nothing I want, Matthew. I got into the back seat of the Porsche. The driver closed the door, leaving my father standing alone in the cold, dimly lit garage, surrounded by the undeniable proof of his own catastrophic failure. As the car drove up the ramp and out into the Seattle sunlight, I didn't look back. I watched my father shrink in the rearview mirror as my driver pulled the Porsche out of the underground garage. The heavy concrete pillars of the parking structure gave way to the bright, rain-washed streets of downtown Seattle. I leaned back against the cool leather of the seat and closed my eyes for a brief moment. The sound of the engine was a low, steady hum, entirely separated from the chaos I had just left behind. For the first time in 35 years, my chest felt completely clear. The heavy, suffocating weight of trying to earn the love of people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it was gone. But I wasn't quite finished. My family had spent months treating me like a dirty secret. They were absolutely terrified that my mere existence, my perceived lack of a corporate salary, would somehow stain their pristine high society image. They wanted a public spectacle of wealth and status. They wanted the world to look at them and see royalty. I decided to give them exactly that public spectacle, just not in the way they anticipated. When I arrived back at my penthouse office, the panoramic view of the city felt different. It felt like absolute ownership. I walked straight to my mahogany desk and hit the intercom. I called my executive assistant, Julian, and my lead corporate lawyer, Dylan. I told them to drop whatever they were doing and get into my office. When they arrived, I poured myself a black coffee and looked at them. We are going to draft a press release, I said, my voice steady and cold. And I want it distributed to every major local news outlet, every hospitality industry publication, and every high society blog in the Pacific Northwest by 3 o'clock this afternoon. Dylan, who usually handled complex corporate acquisitions and brutal contract disputes, raised an eyebrow. A press release about a canceled wedding, Joshua? Isn't that a bit personal? It is highly personal, I replied, and it is going to be the most expensive piece of public relations this company has ever executed. We spent the next 2 hours crafting the exact wording. I didn't want to just cancel the wedding quietly and let my family spin a false narrative to their friends about why the event didn't happen. I knew my mother. She would invent a lie. She would say the venue had a plumbing issue, or the caterer went bankrupt, playing the victim to garner sympathy. I needed to cut off her narrative supply before she could even open her mouth. The press release went out exactly on time. It read like a standard, highly polished corporate announcement, but the underlying message was a precision strike. The headline read, Prestige Hospitality Group reallocates $100,000 wedding budget to local industry charities. The body of the release announced that Prestige Hospitality Group, under the direct instruction of its founder and CEO Joshua Reed, was proud to donate $100,000 to local charities. The donation was being made in honor of the recently canceled Reed Williams wedding, an event that was originally scheduled to take place at our flagship luxury property, Cascade Manor. The funds were specifically allocated to create scholarships for working-class individuals pursuing careers in the culinary arts and hospitality management. We also established a relief fund for restaurant shift workers facing unexpected financial hardships. But the real kill shot was in the final paragraph. The press release proudly detailed my own personal background. It highlighted how I started as a teenage line cook, working for a meager hourly wage, and built a $250 million empire without a college degree, without a corporate safety net, and without a wealthy inheritance. It was a beautiful, devastating piece of public relations. I approved the final draft, watched Julian hit send to our media distribution list, and went home to sleep for 14 hours. By Saturday morning, the day Elijah was supposed to be standing at the altar in a custom tuxedo, the story had caught fire. I woke up, made myself a cup of dark roast coffee, and turned on the local morning news. There it was. The anchors loved the human interest angle. A self-made hospitality magnate turning a cancelled, ultra-luxury wedding into a massive charitable donation for blue-collar workers. It was the perfect feel-good story for the weekend broadcast. In an incredible act of generosity, the blonde anchor smiled into the camera. Seattle billionaire Joshua Reed has taken the cancellation of his own brother's high-profile wedding and turned it into a massive win for local hospitality workers. The story went viral across social media within hours. People on local community boards praised the generosity and the powerful message behind it. They applauded the CEO who remembered his roots and stood up for the working class. But in the wealthy, exclusive social circles that Isabella's family belonged to, the story was an absolute, unmitigated scandal. Everyone in that tier of society knew David Williams. David was a high-powered attorney who handled brutal corporate litigation, messy high-net-worth divorce cases, and vicious custody battles. He was a man who traded entirely on his reputation, his pristine public image, and his ability to intimidate people. He belonged to the most exclusive country clubs. Everyone knew his daughter Isabella was marrying a young corporate upstart named Elijah Reed. And now, everyone knew that Elijah's family had somehow catastrophically alienated the billionaire owner of the very venues they were trying to use to show off. The humiliation for Isabella and her father was absolute. From what I heard later through my network of hotel managers and event coordinators, David exploded when he saw the morning paper. He walked into his country club that morning to play golf, only to be met with sideways glances and hushed whispers from the other members. He realized instantly that my family had been playing a pathetic, dangerous game of pretend. They weren't wealthy peers. They were drowning in debt, desperately trying to fake their way into his world, and they had just publicly insulted one of the most powerful real estate developers in the city. Isabella, faced with the complete destruction of her perfect social image, threw a massive tantrum. She blamed my parents for hiding my identity. My parents, backed into a corner of their own making, blamed Elijah for not managing the situation better. The entire wedding weekend, which was supposed to be a celebration of love and high-status networking, turned into a toxic, screaming match behind closed doors. The fairy tale was dead, replaced by the ugly, undeniable truth of their own greed. David Williams immediately withdrew all financial support for the couple, refusing to have his family name attached to a public relations disaster. 3 months passed. The crisp, rainy Seattle autumn settled over the city. The media cycle moved on to other stories, the viral posts faded into the background, and the public forgot about the canceled Reed Williams wedding. But the wreckage my family was left to deal with was permanent. I was sitting in my office on a quiet Tuesday morning, reviewing the architectural blueprints for a new boutique hotel, when Julian walked in. He didn't say a word. He just handed me a thick, handwritten envelope. The return address was my parents' house. I hadn't spoken a single word to Matthew or Sarah since that day in the parking garage. I hadn't answered a text, an email, or a phone call. I took a silver letter opener from my desk drawer, sliced the top of the envelope, and pulled out a 3-page letter written in my mother's overly dramatic, looping cursive. It was an absolute masterpiece of emotional manipulation. She wrote at length about how much she missed her eldest son. She wrote about the unbreakable bonds of family, the importance of forgiveness, and how life was too short to hold on to anger. She painted a picture of a grieving mother who just wanted her family whole again. She practically begged for a chance to sit down, have dinner, and reconnect and heal. But I had spent 15 years reading the fine print of multimillion-dollar contracts. I knew exactly how to read between the lines. My parents were in absolute, catastrophic financial ruin. The second mortgage they had secretly taken out to pay for the wedding deposits was now a massive, heavy anchor dragging them underwater. Because the wedding was canceled under my corporate terms, which stipulated that the funding party held the right to terminate, the $65,000 I paid was kept within my company's. But the other expenses my parents had incurred on their own were completely lost. The custom dresses, the non-refundable deposits to third-party vendors I didn't own, the extravagant gifts they had bought for Isabella's family to keep up appearances. They had drained what was left of Caroline's college fund. They had liquidated their own retirement accounts. They were stuck paying exorbitant interest rates on a house they could no longer afford, all for a single day of fake glory that never materialized. Matthew's middle management salary as an insurance adjuster wasn't nearly enough to cover the new debts. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that they had to sell my father's prized SUV and my mother's sedan, replacing them with a single 10-year-old compact car. They stopped going out to restaurants. The high society lifestyle they had briefly tasted had turned to literal ash in their mouths. They weren't reaching out to me because they suddenly loved me. They weren't writing letters because they realized the error of their judgment. They were reaching out because they finally realized I was a billionaire, and I was the only person on earth with enough liquid cash to save them from a humiliating bankruptcy. I slowly tore the letter in half, then into quarters, and dropped the pieces into the trash can beside my desk. But the most fascinating piece of information came to light a few weeks later in December. It was the final puzzle piece that explained exactly how the toxic narrative about me had gotten so wildly out of control, even beyond my parents' usual snobbery. I was attending an exclusive charity gala downtown, hosted in the grand ballroom of a rival hotel. The room was filled with the city's elite, politicians, tech CEOs, and high-powered lawyers. I was standing near the bar, listening to the soft jazz band play in the background, when I saw David Williams walking toward me. I expected him to avoid me. I expected the father of the bride, whose wedding I had publicly destroyed, to glare at me from across the room. Instead, he walked right up to my table, holding a glass of expensive scotch. He looked incredibly tired, the deep lines around his eyes far more pronounced than they had been in photographs. "Joshua," he said, extending a hand. His voice was gravelly but respectful. I shook his hand firmly, keeping my expression neutral. "David, I'm surprised you're speaking to me." David let out a harsh, dry chuckle and took a sip of his drink. "I owe you an apology, Joshua. I am a man who makes a living discovering the truth, and I failed completely in my own family. We made some terrible, deeply offensive assumptions about you based on absolute lies." "I appreciate the apology, David," I said smoothly. "But the assumptions didn't come out of nowhere. My family painted a very specific, very pathetic picture of me." David sighed, looking down at his glass. "It wasn't just your parents, Joshua. It was your cousin, Nathan." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "Nathan?" "Yes," David explained, his jaw tightening with residual anger. "Nathan cornered Isabella at an engagement party several months before the wedding. He told her, in strict confidence, that you were drowning in credit card debt. He said you were a bitter, struggling restaurant shift worker who deeply resented Elijah's corporate promotion and his success. He told Isabella that if you came to the wedding, you would probably get heavily drunk and start asking her wealthy relatives for loans, or begging them for entry-level jobs. My blood ran completely cold. He explicitly warned us that you were a massive social liability," David continued. "He told us you were desperate for money. So, when your parents suggested keeping you out of the main events to avoid embarrassing us, Isabella fully supported it. We thought we were protecting the dignity of the event from a desperate addict." The puzzle snapped together with sickening, perfect clarity. Nathan, the younger cousin who had constantly borrowed money from me for years, always playing the victim. He begged for cash to fix his transmission, to pay his rent, to cover his medical bills. He had taken my money, smiled to my face, called me a lifesaver, and then went directly to Isabella to assassinate my character. He threw me to the wolves, painting me as a degenerate beggar, just to make himself look better and gain favor with the wealthy in-laws. He fabricated a story to secure his own VIP invitation and guarantee his +1. It was the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal. My own blood had actively conspired to destroy my reputation. The very next morning, I walked into Dylan's office. "I need you to pull every single financial record, every bank transfer, every cleared check regarding the personal loans I have given my cousin Nathan over the past 10 years. Track down every single penny." Dylan didn't ask questions. By the end of the day, he had a file, It amounted to nearly $42,000. They were undocumented, friendly loans between family members, meaning I had no legal grounds to sue him for repayment. But I didn't want to sue him. That would be too quiet. That would be handled behind closed doors. Instead, I had my team make high-quality copies of every single bank transfer receipt, every cleared check, and printed screenshots of Nathan's desperate text messages begging me for money. I compiled them into neat, professional portfolios. I didn't add a long letter. I simply included a small, printed card that read, "Nathan's financial advice to Isabella Williams regarding my supposed poverty was the primary reason the wedding imploded. Here is the reality of who has been funding his life." I mailed a portfolio via certified overnight delivery to every single member of our extended family. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, second cousins. Within 48 hours, the explosion happened. Nathan was entirely excommunicated by the very people he had tried to impress. The extended family, who had been gossiping about my cruelty, suddenly saw the undeniable paper trail of Nathan's parasitic behavior and his malicious lies. He became an absolute pariah. Nobody would take his calls. His own parents were too ashamed to show their faces at Sunday church. The truth had finally scrubbed the family clean. The final chapter of this miserable saga with my immediate family closed on a quiet, rainy Sunday in November, almost exactly a full year after they had sat me down in their living room and tried to uninvite me from the wedding. I was standing in my kitchen, listening to the rain beat against the heavy glass windows, pouring myself a second cup of coffee. My personal phone, the private number that only a select few people possessed, buzzed on the granite counter. I picked it up. It was a text message from Elijah. It wasn't a short message. It was a massive block of text, taking up the entire screen. But as I read it, I noticed something profoundly different. It was completely devoid of the arrogance, the entitlement, and the condescension he used to carry like a shield. "Josh," the message began, "I know you probably won't read this, and I know you have every right to delete it immediately. But I have to say it, for my own conscience. I am sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. I let Mom and Dad get into my head for years. I let Isabella's family make me feel insecure about who I was and where we came from. I was so obsessed with looking like a corporate success, so obsessed with my salary and my title, that I treated the most successful, hardworking person I know like absolute garbage." I leaned against the counter, reading the words slowly. "You didn't ruin my life," the text continued. "I ruined it myself by being a coward. I didn't stand up for you when Mom and Dad insulted you. I didn't stand up for you when Nathan lied about you. Isabella and I broke off the engagement for 6 months. It was brutal. We had to go to therapy. But we are trying to work things out. We are actually getting married next month. It's just going to be at a public park near the water. A justice of the peace and for friends. No catering. No grand ballroom. No suits. I'm not asking you to come. I know I don't deserve the right to ask for your presence. I just wanted you to know that you were right about everything. You were right about me. I hope you have a good life, Josh." I stood in my kitchen, staring at the glowing screen, reading the message a second time to make sure I hadn't imagined it. I waited for the familiar surge of anger to rise in my chest. I waited for the bitterness, the desire to fire back a sarcastic reply, the urge to remind him of his colossal failure. But nothing came. There was absolutely no anger left in me. There was no desire for further revenge. The fire that had fueled my ambition and my resentment for 15 years had completely burned itself out. It left behind nothing but clean, fertile ground for my own future. Elijah was finally growing up, stripped of the fake luxury, the country club expectations, and our parents' toxic influence. He was finally learning the brutal, necessary lesson of adulthood. He was learning that a fancy middle management promotion, a leased car, and an expensive suit mean absolutely nothing if you lack basic integrity. He was learning the hard way that character is built in the dark, not under the chandeliers of a rented ballroom. I took a deep breath, unlocked my phone, and typed out a response. It would be the last time I ever communicated with him. I appreciate the genuine apology, Elijah. I really do. I am glad to hear you are taking responsibility for your actions. I genuinely hope you and Isabella find happiness in your park ceremony. Build a life based on truth, not appearances. Focus on being a good man, not a rich one. I wish you the absolute best, but our paths go in different directions now. Take care of yourself. I read it over once, ensuring there was no malice in the words, and I hit send. Then I went into my phone settings. I selected Elijah's contact file, scrolled to the bottom, and hit block caller. I went to my father's contact. Blocked. My mother. Blocked. My sister Caroline. Blocked. Nathan. Blocked. I systematically severed the final, fraying threads that tied me to the people who had brought me nothing but grief, judgment, and pain. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it out of a profound need for peace. I set the phone down on the counter. The silence in my apartment wasn't lonely. It was expansive. It was the most liberating moment of my entire life. I had spent 15 long years building a massive corporate empire in the shadows, terrified of my family's judgment. I had let their narrow, pathetic worldview dictate how I dressed, how I drove, and how I lived my life. I had hidden my success because I thought it would protect me from their scorn. But standing there in my quiet kitchen, looking out over the sprawling city that I had literally helped build, I finally understood my own power. I didn't need their approval. I never did. I had a fiercely loyal executive team. I had a brilliant lawyer who had my back. I had mentors like Mr. Carter who respected me for my character and my work ethic, not my bank account. I had a life that I had forged with my own two bare hands, through blood, sweat, burned bridges, and relentless determination. The chapter of my life where I was the struggling, unappreciated older brother was permanently closed. When you achieve a certain level of financial success in this world, people always want to sit you down and ask you what the big secret is. They want to know the aggressive stock picks, the brilliant real estate acquisition strategies, the ruthless negotiation tactics that got you to the top. They look at the suits, the cars, and the bank accounts, and they want the blueprint. But in all my years of business, nobody ever asks about the emotional cost. Nobody asks about the people you have to forcibly leave behind in order to protect your peace. If there is one profound thing this entire miserable ordeal taught me, it's that concealing your wealth is the greatest, most brutal filter for human character ever invented. Because my success was not public knowledge, because I drove an old car and wore cheap clothes, I was granted a rare, unvarnished view of the people around me. I got to see exactly how my family treated a man they believed had absolutely nothing to offer them. I saw their true faces, completely undistorted by the massive gravitational pull of money. I saw the condescension in my mother's eyes. I saw the absolute disgust in my father's posture. I saw the sneer on my brother's face. If they had known about my wealth from the beginning, they would have smiled at me. They would have invited me to every dinner. They would have placed me at the head of every table. But their smiles would have been bought and paid for. Their respect would have been nothing more than a transaction. Blood does not make someone family. We are conditioned by society to believe that biological ties are sacred, that you must endure endless abuse simply because you share the same DNA. But blood is just a biological accident. True family is determined entirely by loyalty, by mutual respect, and by how someone treats you when you are standing in the mud with nothing to your name. My parents loved the idea of a wealthy son who could fund their desperate social climbing. They loved the idea of a human ATM that could elevate their status in front of Isabella's wealthy father. But they did not love Joshua. They did not love the teenage boy who worked 100 hours a week in a pub kitchen to build a life. They didn't love the man who sacrificed his youth to build an empire. There is a profound, destructive danger in letting other people dictate your self-worth based on their own limited information. My family assumed I was failing at life simply because I didn't fit their narrow, outdated corporate definition of success. They assumed my quiet, private life meant an empty, unsuccessful life. They judged a book not just by its cover, but by a cover they had completely imagined in their own minds. Their assumptions cost them everything. It cost them a luxury wedding, it cost them their financial stability, it cost them their social standing, and most importantly, it cost them a relationship with a son who would have literally moved mountains for them if they had simply shown him a single shred of genuine human respect. To everyone watching this video right now, especially those of you who have ever felt like the black sheep of your own family, those of you who have worked tirelessly in the background, keeping your head down, while others took the spotlight and the praise, I want you to listen to me very carefully, because this is the most important part of my entire story. Never, ever let anyone, not even the people who raised you, make you feel inferior because your path doesn't look like theirs. You do not owe your success, your money, or your mental health to people who only offer you respect on a conditional basis. If they demand a seat at your table during the massive feast, but they wouldn't sit on the floor with you when you were starving, they do not belong in your life. Period. Setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty, even when society tries to make you feel guilty for it. Walking away from toxic parents or abusive siblings is an act of profound self-respect. Sometimes, the absolute most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from the people who continuously, relentlessly tear you down to make themselves feel taller. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you. You have to be willing to pack up, leave the room, build your own table with your own chairs, and invite the people who actually value your presence. This brings me to the educational lesson I want to impart today. The core truth I want you to take away from my 15 years of silence and my ultimate vindication. Your fundamental value as a human being is not determined by a corporate salary. It is not determined by a prestigious university degree, a flashy job title, or an inheritance you did nothing to earn. Your true value is determined by your resilience in the face of adversity. It is determined by your integrity when nobody is watching, and your absolute willingness to stand tall when everyone around you expects you to fall. Financial independence is not just about buying nice cars or living in penthouses. True financial independence is the power of choice. It is the power to say no to toxic situations. It is the armor that protects you from being controlled by people who hold money over your head. When you build your own wealth, no matter how small or large, you buy your own freedom. You buy the right to construct your life exactly the way you want it, surrounded only by the people who truly deserve to be there. Do not subsidize the lives of people who disrespect you. Do not pay for the privilege of being humiliated. Reclaim your power, cut the dead weight from your life, and focus your energy entirely on building a reality that makes you fiercely proud. If this story resonated with you, if you agree that protecting your peace, establishing absolute boundaries, and judging people by their character rather than their bank accounts are the keys to a fulfilling life, please comment the word good down below. I read every single comment on these videos, knowing that my journey, my pain, and my ultimate vindication have helped even one of you realize your own worth makes every single hardship I went through completely worth it. It reminds me that our struggles are never truly wasted if we can use them to light the path for someone else. Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving me your time and listening to my story. Keep building your empires, keep fighting for your peace, and never ever apologize for outgrowing the people who explicitly refuse to grow with you. Until next time.